What makes a modern probation officer? In this episode, I sat down with Chief Robert Reyes from San Luis Obispo County and Chief T.R. Merickel from Kern County to get their perspectives on the makeup of a probation professional and how probation truly is an integral connector in the justice system. I hope you enjoy. Welcome to the California Probation Connection today. Thanks for joining us. I'm really looking forward to jumping in and talking about what is the modern probation officer. And so I know you guys traveled quite some ways to get here to Sacramento to share your thoughts with us. So let's just jump right in. I know both of you have probably about 25 years of experience each in the industry. So what's changed over the last 25 years? We'll start with you.
Sure. Yeah, a lot has changed, but I was thinking about this, and one thing that's interesting is what we do now. We had people in our departments doing it, but I think the biggest difference is now it's systematic, it's expected. So when I started, there was officers who had the right balance. They cared about what they were doing and wanting to make a change, and they would hold people accountable. They would do the balance that we do now, but it was kind of more hit and miss, and it wasn't necessarily the expectation. I think some people just went above and beyond. And I think what I've seen over my career is that as we learned what works, we've implemented it and it's become the new standard. So what we were doing back then, those exceptional people, that should be the baseline now, and then you have people now who are exceptional even above that. But that's what I've seen the big difference is, our trauma-informed care, our evidence-based practices, doing what works, building that rapport with our clients. And as a leader, we have to keep bringing the standard up and up.
Why do you think that is, Chief Merickel? Why do you think, the profession gravitated to that and that becoming the standard? Is it something that, was kind of forced upon the industry? Was it something that just kind of naturally felt like that was the way we should be going? What do you think accounts for that?
Yeah, I think a lot of it was, our embracing of evidence-based practice and what works. So there's a lot of research. And I think probation in general, we're open to, we want to do what works. I mean, that's why you get into probation. You want to make a difference. And I think when you see studies, that show, hey, these certain things, the evidence-based cognitive behavioral therapy, things like that, addressing the top criminogenic needs. And you see studies that, hey, this is what works. This is what helps us accomplish our mission of reducing recidivism, making a safer community. When you look at that, you have two choices. And I think most of us are practical, right, hopefully somewhat intelligent people, and of course, you're going to do what works.
Right.
And I think together we've just raised the standard up of what our profession is because, we've always had the same goal, but now we have the better tools to do it.
That's an interesting point. Proof is in the pudding, right? You really wanted to, be sure that public safety and, changing lives. And once you start seeing what actually makes that work, it really helps. So, Chief Reyes, what about you? What's been your kind of trajectory of the profession?
Sure. I think my biggest takeaway is just that it kind of came to me when I was preparing our resolution for Probation Services Week. And my goal is always to try to really tell the story of what we do. I was taken back by how much we do now in the spaces we occupy in the criminal justice system. When I started, it was, there were investigations or you were community supervision. Drug courts were kind of just emerging in the late 90s. And since then, our responsibilities and what we do from, diversion and truancy, maybe on the juvenile sides, to pretrial now, to just our traditional jobs, but now with post-release, and many of our counties now occupying collaborations on homelessness and mental illness. It's been amazing how much the ask of probation officers are now in the state in the last 25 years.
That's so true. It seems like almost any issue that pops up in and around how do we make our communities thrive, how can they be safer, all those things seem like probation is a part of the conversation, connecting somehow, some way, or leading the conversation. Why do you think that is?
Well, I want to say it's because we are very adaptable people. I think our orientation in this profession is to solve problems. And I think that comes very natural to us as a profession. And I think that's helpful when we're having discussions with our partners where different systems are crossing because we're seeing the same population. I think we're really good about really trying to diagnose and try to fit a solution that's workable for all systems that are involved. I mean, we see that on an everyday basis with our collaborative treatment court programs and some of the other collaboratives that we are involved in. So you see it every day, and I think that's what it is. I think we're very adaptable, which I think is really important. I think we're always solution focused and trying to do what we think is right to serve the public and improve community safety, and hopefully helping those that with the services and the connections we try to make for them.
Yeah, no, adaptable is a word that we hear, often used in describing, what makes a good probation officer, what's, good for the department, the system. So I wonder why that is. Like, when you go out and hire, Chief Merickel, are you looking for those kinds of characteristics in who you're hiring? Or do you feel like that's something that we train to after we, kind of get folks into the profession? Because it definitely seems from my observation, that is one of the key things that you see across the board, across counties.
Yeah, probably a couple of things. I think, first of all, if you probably have more of that tendency if you are attracted to the work of probation. Mm-hmm. I definitely think that's who I want to hire. I want to hire people, and I'm not worried about as much what your degree's in or what you've really done before. I want somebody who's intelligent, who will listen, and who cares. And if you have those characters, I can teach you to do anything, and that's what we do. I think we have really good training. That's another thing that I think has improved greatly, in my 25 career is our level of training. But
right.
If you have those things, you care, you're smart, and you're open to learning, then you're going to be successful in this job.
Makes a lot of sense. It definitely seems like anytime I'm in a meeting with any of your officers or we're just talking around the table with the chiefs, that just constantly comes through, in this constant evolution of the profession and embracing that, which is hard. However, since we're asking our clients to change all the time, I guess it does make sense that as a system partner, that comes naturally to us. And so that's really interesting. We had asked, as you all know, some of your colleagues put into the chat in a recent Zoom call 2 words that describe the profession or the characteristics that the probation officer, the modern probation officer, has to have. So I'm going to read a couple of the words that came across, and then I'm really interested to hear what your words are and maybe why. Coach, change agent, dynamic, innovative, growth mindset, critical thinker, nimble, innovative, compassionate, flexible, multifunctional, resilient, transformative, supportive, just to name a few. And, the list kind of goes on. And I thought to myself, wow, that is the type of description probably anybody wants to put in a job description about the characteristics you would have, in hiring somebody. But I think a lot of folks might find it super interesting that is the most important things that you're looking for when you're hiring what is essentially a peace officer, correct? In right. Many of the job classifications in the probation department. And so, I always find it interesting to try to distill it into just a couple of words. So, Chief Reyes, your 2 words.
My 2 words, I really had given it a great deal of thought, and I went with more of a motto because I think it captures everything we do. So I went with always serving because that's what we do. We like I said, we serve in so many different aspects of the criminal justice system and the juvenile justice system. And so the first thing I'm always going to look for is somebody that has that heart for public service, because we all know that this job quickly will humble you because you know less about a lot when you start this job. And it takes a while for you to be able to learn the many different things we have to learn. So if you don't have that, to me, that sort of spirit of humility and that desire to want to serve the public, it's hard to train. Because I agree with Chief Merickel. We're a lot better when it comes to training now when I started.
Yeah.
And the amount of training that we asked our officers to go to and complete on a yearly basis really requires them to have to really always be in that kind of mindset that, hey, I always have something to learn.
Yeah.
And here's the reason why.
Yeah.
I want to serve. So
absolutely. And I mean, you're speaking my love language. I love public service. I love that concept. I think that if there was more of that kind of embedded upon everyone, we would kind of get along better. We'd solve a lot more problems. Yeah. And that does seem indicative of what we often see in the probation profession, right? It almost doesn't matter what we're being asked to do, which you guys were just talking about that earlier. And maybe we didn't even agree the direction in which the choice for the policy, was made, but we just don't let it fail. We adapt. Because we're trying to serve the broader mission, the broader issue at hand. So that does kind of resonate with me, at least. I'm sure it does with many others. So, Chief Merickel, that we love your 2 words have really become a mantra across the state. And once you uttered them at a CPOC meeting, it just caught on like wildfire. So give us a little bit about your 2 words
Sure.
and how it came about.
My 2 words are accountability and opportunity. And I think what that shows is the balance that probation brings and what I want in my officers. And, it's important as probation officers, as peace officers, that we hold people accountable. That's an important thing. When someone's out there doing something and hurting somebody, we need to be there to hold them accountable. And then when you do that, you get kind of like instant public safety. But we also need to make sure we provide people opportunities and break down barriers. Because if we provide people those opportunities and they take advantage of them, they can break the cycle of recidivism. And that's where you get long-term public safety. And so it's as a probation officer, it's a difficult job because you have to shift between those things. But the main thing is that you always remember the balance. And if you go too far one way or the other, you're not doing what our job is. Our job is really be in that middle and provide that balance of accountability and opportunity.
Yeah, well, as you know, we love that. We think, it's very hard. I'm constantly grappling with how do you succinctly explain what it is that we do? How do you put it in a bottle? And that's a great way to do it, to really talk about even the broader issues, really the policy issue behind what we do and why we do it in the way in which we do it, which kind of touches on some of the, I would say, controversy or maybe in our role and especially when worlds want to kind of pull at the extremes, which is always the case in anything, but certainly in public safety. So, we've often heard there have been times in our history where we were really more akin to a social worker, right? And then there have been times in our history where maybe the enforcement piece, the kind of the peace officer part of it seemed to be more embedded. Are we one or the other? Do we lean a little more one way or the other? How would you describe that? Chief Reyes, you want to give it a shot?
Yeah, I guess I reject that we are one or the other. I think we just actually it's a disservice to our profession. I mean, I agree with Chief Merickel. We want to be that balance because then we are relevant in the system. Once we decide to go either one path or the other, then we're no longer unique in the system. We're simply just either a traditional law enforcement agency or we're a traditional, what do you want to call, social work or a rehabilitative agency. And I think, we all know that I think each is very important. And I think that's always kind of been like my struggle is like, how can I put one word and describe what a probation officer is? I think it's really difficult to do. I guess I could argue that we are a criminal justice specialists because we have to actually know all the facets of the criminal justice system to some degree and of the juvenile justice system. Right. But we also got to kind of know the other systems that we work with. And so it makes it really difficult to define it by one word. But I do think I like the accountability and opportunity. I have adopted it. It's, I tell my staff, if someone asks you what probation does, simply say, we're officers that do accountability and opportunity for the populations we serve. So,
absolutely. Although I love it, we're starting to get into this now. I like you reject the premise, and I think that we've been spending a lot of time trying to do that and educate folks along those lines. So, how do you kind of deal with that balance and some of the things that maybe have occurred over time and even in your career? And And, do you too stand with us rejecting
Yes.
that you being put into a box?
You can sign me up for that.
All right, good.
But I like to think about, we all talk about how the pendulum swings back and forth, to one side or the other. And I think what probation is, we're the person who grabs the pendulum and holds it right in the middle, and that's what accountability and opportunity is, because there's a tendency to overreact to a problem, to either go either way. And, there's been thousands of years of philosophy and different religions that talk about moderation, and the middle way is the correct way. And I think probation's really adopted that. Yeah. And I think, like I said, we're not something with something. We're distinctly ourselves. And like, you don't ask, well, what is a cop? You don't say, what is a lawyer? You don't say, well, a lawyer is like this, but does this. Right. They're just a lawyer, or they're just a cop. And so I think we're just probation officers, and we're uniquely different that way. And it's, I think it is our job to explain what we do. And so people just know, yeah, you're a probation officer. You're not this plus that. You are what you are. And we're an incredibly important part of the criminal justice system. And over the last decade plus, we become a larger and larger part, an integral part of it. And when new reform is passed, usually, is looked to probation to implement that reform. And often in the legislation, it excludes other people from leading it. We're the ones that it go to. And I think that's because there's a recognition that we are uniquely situated, and we have the ability to get things done.
Yeah, I would add too that what makes us unique in the system is that we're free from the sort of traditional politics that we see from others in the system who are elected. And I think that does allow us to be able to operate in the middle way, as Chief Merickel described it, and former president described it that way some years ago, the middle way, because it is effective. We're free to really embrace alternative views, bounce them off our own views about how we see our position, learn what other system partners, what their goal is. And I think us being able to do that, we're always effective trying to find that path to achieving whatever the outcome it is in our jobs on a daily basis. And so I think that also helps, that we're sort of free from those political influences, and because I'm not elected, Chief Merickel's not elected, and so we don't necessarily have to always deal with that. We have to be politically astute because we operate in that area, but I think we have some freedom to kind of reached across the other aisle in some ways and work with.
Absolutely. I definitely, that resonates with me as well. I'm curious if you think, though, because I think that what you're saying is also echoed by your peers, at the chief's table. As officers who, are out there kind of trying to, explain what they do at the barbecue when they're, with others, maybe other stakeholders in the system, and don't really understand how important or unique the role is, or why they're being asked to do things. Do you feel as though that your officers embrace that same kind of point of view, trying to hold on to that middle, and that's an important role that they play? I mean, do you think folks take pride? It sounds like you think they should. Do you see that reflected in some of the conversations you have with your staff?
Yeah, I do see that. I also think too, though, that I think from times we do experience a role conflict because we pulled those two different ways. I don't think that stops, and I think it's always there. I mean, and that's going to also look different across the 58 counties across the state. Probation, we all kind of believe in our core fundamental missions that we have, but it's going to look a little bit different. And I think as a chief and even our staff, we are sensitive to how the public perceives us, and sometimes the public perceives us reinforces our own perception of what we are. So I do think that remains sometimes a conflict. And I think as a chief, I'm sort of here to sort of give some context to that and sort of help guide officers and staff. Like, this is where we want to be because it's the most effective where to be, and not go one way or the other.
Yeah, no, I mean, I would imagine it's a constant, kind of discussion and a reminder and that kind of thing. And, Chief Merickel, we know philosophy is something that you're kind of grounded in. And so do you have these kind of discussions with your department as well? I mean, how do you kind of keep them when it seems like folks feel like there needs to be a move one direction or the other? How do you remind folks that important role?
I think constant messaging is really important, and so when I first became chief, I didn't want to repeat myself every time I gave a talk. I'm like, well, people are hurt. Then I realized, no, I think I got to keep saying this. And so that's where, accountability and opportunity for me really came in. So every time I go in front of the board or I talk at a core graduation, I'm giving some variation of that. And I think when you repeat that over and over again, and I tell my staff, make sure it's included in our evaluations. You're constantly messaging to our staff so they know that, this is what this department is all about. And it applies a little differently in every position. Accountability and opportunity looks a little different in court investigations versus out in the field or pretrial. But those core tenets are there everywhere we go, and we just need to remind our staff all the time that.
Yeah, and I think it's important to highlight when we've done an effective job on both sides of that account. I guess for the discussion point, if we're accountability opportunity, it's really important to highlight when our officers are successful in either of those, because they're both important. Yeah. And I think that's something that I could always improve on, and making sure that positive reinforcement, the fact that you got I'm thinking about a probation officer, a young probation officer who got a thank you card from somebody that was transferred to another county, just thanking him for just being supportive, just being there, helping him kind of navigate probation. I just got an email even today from our law enforcement part, thinking after a long narcotics investigation that was actually led by a probation officer, and took, a lot of pounds of methamphetamine and fentanyl off the streets, guns off the street. And again, those are really great examples, and we should highlight those because they're both important.
Yeah. So, if I could add something to that, just really reminded me what Chief Reyes said. So in my department, we have a challenge coin that, you can earn by doing something. And on the back, there's a quote from Winston Churchill, which is, courage is what it takes to stand up and speak. Courage is also what it takes to sit down and listen. And that quote to me captures the dual roles of what probation does. And so our staff can earn that challenge coin when they do one or the other type of that courage, or maybe both in a certain situation. And so what Chief Reyes said, it's really important to make sure that we reward what we want, right? Not just expect it, but reward it and acknowledge it.
Yeah. I love that. Okay, now you're speaking my other love language, Winston Churchill. This is getting crazy. I know.
We've mentioned Churchill. We've had Eisenhower with the middle way. So this happens. You get a bunch of political science historians, philosophers.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. So, one of the things that a couple of notes that I had written to myself to make sure that we kind of hit on, and I think it has come out of conversations that we've had previously, but one of the things that strikes me is this multidisciplinary approach that we were asking our folks to embrace and utilize. It's difficult, so the training that goes in, the constant messaging, the rewarding of what you're expecting is important, but it's actually that type of approach that leads to public safety. And that's kind of the important link that I think sometimes people don't quite understand. People think public safety is just the enforcement piece. It's such an important part, the accountability part, as you've been saying, but we're missing something really important if we don't kind of approach it from that disciplinary, feel. So, and I think some of that concept may have come from some conversations that we have had, Chief Reyes. So, I want you to feel free to add anything to that while we're on it.
Yeah, it's that multidisciplinary. We are, and my attitude is like when I think about my own department, I just had this conversation with some of our instructors that do a lot of our sort of law enforcement tactics classes, and I said, listen, I want to make sure at the end of the day that you're confident, because I'll be confident that our officers could win if we're ever in that situation, that we could win. They could win and go home. That's all I care about. So we're going to do everything we can to make sure that happens. At the same time, on the other side, when I talk to those that are doing our case plan instruction or our risk assessment, I want to make sure that officers are are utilizing those tools, utilizing those practices in a skillful way so that they can chart the course that's really going to serve their probationers or whoever they're working with to a successful outcome. And knowing where to make those connections, knowing what services are out there in the community that they could reach to get help. And partly it's about establishing those relationships across the entire spectrum. Yeah, I mean, it's a big ask of officers in the department, but that's what we do. That's what we're about. And we should be 100% committed to both at the same time. Because I really think if we are, then we're relevant. So that's just kind of my thoughts on that.
Absolutely. You look like you might want to say something. I don't want to cut you off.
Just to reiterate a little bit, but it really is important to the full. What we've talked about a lot here is we do a lot of stuff,
right?
And sometimes it almost seems contradictory, but that's the key about probation, that it's not. Mm-hmm. It's two sides of the same coin, right. And so you have to know when to use what part of it. But with multidisciplinary, not just internally, but another thing I think we've grown a lot over the years is not operating in a silo. It's really important to have community partners, and with our behavioral health or with community-based organizations, like we cannot be successful without partners. Yeah. And the more that we understand all these different disciplines, not that we have to be necessarily an expert in everything, but we need to have an understanding. We know who to reach out to and who to connect and who to bring in, and all working together, which is another thing. We talk about probation being a connector. That's really, really important, because without that connection, we're not going to be as successful as we could be.
No, I really appreciate you bringing that in, because sometimes I get so laser focused on probation. I mean, that's my part of the job, but the big piece of that is the connection. I mean, it's the title of the podcast, right? I mean, we can't do the job, we can't be as successful if we're not connecting. We don't do it by ourselves, right? No. We don't kind of accomplish this larger mission by ourselves. But not everybody are natural collaborators, right? I mean, some people like working in teams, other people, are kind of solo. I mean, probation, that's another important characteristic, it seems to me, right? That you have to be able to be collaborative, work with others, work in teams, and recognize what others need in the system, not just the client, to be successful.
Yeah, no, and I think I sort of mentioned it by, I look for people that have humility. I mean, to some degree, that also means they know how to kind of put their ego aside. Because it's hard work sometimes to be collaborative. It's not easy, because you have to set aside your ego. You may have to set aside your path, because really the other path may be more effective. But if the outcome is going to be the same, the goal is going to be attained, then we shouldn't worry about it. Doesn't sort of diminish our role in the collaborative if we go a different way. So I do think that's another important characteristic, that we have to be able to effectively do that. And sort of keep the end goal in mind.
That makes sense, and I'm going to take that to heart myself, because I know sometimes there's especially in politics, it's about a win-loss. So those are things that we need to kind of all keep in mind when we're talking about probation and policies around probation. And so, speaking of that, and you both have touched on it in a couple of your comments, we ask our officers to do a lot, and to be able to do a lot. And I think, Chief Merickel, you even referred to this past decade, really there's been a lot of reform. There's been a lot of change. And so, how do you think we as a profession have managed it? What do you think your officers are thinking as they're trying to implement the various different reforms? Just give some thoughts about the things we really ask our officers to do.
Yeah, and I mean, one thing I'm thankful every day as chief is how amazing my staff is, and you look at all the work they do, and like you've said, we keep being asked to do more, right? And we can handle it, but it's a lot. And there are some times where we're kind of like, can we catch our breath here? Let's perfect this last one we did before you lay another one on us. But but we do it, we implement it, and we do ask, like staff, we all have trauma-informed care. They all know how to do evidence-based programming and understand that. We do individualized case plans. There's all this stuff that when I started, we weren't doing that stuff. So all this stuff has been added on. So it is a heavy lift. But every day I see our staff come to work, and they meet the bar and go above it often. And it's that's just something I'm really thankful for.
Thank God there are people like that out there.
Yes.
That's all I have to say. Because oftentimes they're being asked to do this with maybe not all the tools that you guys were just talking about are necessary. So, and I mean, how do you go about making sure that your staff do have the tools? Mentioning evidence-based practices and kind of the advent of that, the training, the different pieces. What is it that you as chief have to do to make sure that happens?
That's really my job,
right?
It's the chief's job is to make sure that if I'm gonna, I don't mind asking somebody to do a job, but I better give them the tools and the ability to do it, because if I don't, then I'm failing. So that's really a big part of leadership is seeing, hey, what do you need to get this done? If I'm asking you to do something tough, I need to remove all the barriers so that you can be successful. Then as chief, also you have to kind of look a couple moves ahead, like where are things going? So we don't want to be reactive. No. We want to be proactive. When we know something's coming down the pike, then we should try to move before it's forced on us. And so I think that's a lot of doing that. But that's hard. Like you said, change is hard and learning new things is difficult. So the least that we can do is make sure that we give the tools and the support to our staff to accomplish.
And you need to get the support, right, from are the natural places, the board of supervisors, your other partners where appropriate, the state.
Yeah,
you
definitely need friends to help, because
friends everywhere.
It ultimately comes down to resources. Like you can have great ideas and you can have great passion, but if you don't have the resources to actually accomplish it, then you're not going to be able to do it. So that's where Chief Reyes was saying, we're not political animals by nature, but we have to navigate this political, minefield at times. And so, that's another thing as leadership. We want to make sure we position ourselves in the right way. We always keep our values and we do our mission, but how do you do that in the best way that you are making more friends than enemies? And so, and that's not always easy, but that's really important. And that's one thing that I think I've learned, in my almost 8 years of chief, that, the more successful you do that, the more successful your department will be, and then your line staff, will have those resources that they need to do what we ask of them.
Makes a lot of sense. Chief Reyes?
Yeah, no, I mean, everything Chief Merickel said, I completely agree with. I think, that is our job as the chief. And I think the other thing I would add to that is sometimes we are asked to do a lot. And if it wasn't for, I can't compliment all the probation staff that I've met, just the spirit, the enthusiasm they have for the work is incredible. And including, my own staff who do a lot. But I do think, I think it's important for the chief. We're honest. Sometimes I don't know the outcome of this. I don't always know exactly what's the reasoning behind it. But I think it's important to let everybody know, look, it's about serving. It's the right thing to do. We may not know what the outcome is going to be, but this is what has been given to us, and our job is to go out there and implement that in the most effective way we can. And, my job is to make sure like those resources are there to support that. At the same time, we as chiefs and leaders, we have to make hard choices. We're going to have to prioritize some things over others. And I think as long as you can explain that to the judges, to your CAOs, to the board, as long as you can explain it and you're honest about it, I think you'll be okay.
We've talked a lot about how we would describe ourselves. The two words. What are chiefs looking for in the modern probation officer? How do you think some of those people who you have to lean on for support to get the tools you were just talking about, or your stakeholders that you're collaborating with, how would they describe probation? Do you think that they see it the same way you see it? I know this is a little bit of a curveball. Yeah. I didn't tell you I might ask this.
Well, we did kind of talk about this on the drive up here from the Central Valley, but I don't know. I still think there's some mystique about how the public and others outside of the probation system see us. We happened to encounter somebody last night. As much as we identified ourselves as probation officers, kept saying, "Oh, you're parole officers." I'm like, "No, we're not parole officers. We're probation officers." So I do think there's some of that education, but again, looking at locally, we are very much seen as a public safety agency, and we're very much seen as a justice partner, a rehabilitative treatment partner. Just great appreciation across not only the different local systems, but even across a board that is politically divided. Ideologically, they're all very supportive of what we do. And I think, again, it goes back to being really skilled, to be able to speak to both sides, because both sides have different priorities and concerns. But be able to effectively communicate that and operate in that, I think really pays off dividends when we're looking for more resources and that support.
Yeah, and how we talked earlier about messaging to our staff so they know we have to do that doubly as hard with all of our stakeholders and decision makers in our community. So that's why when you whatever your mantra is, you need to keep repeating it because my experience, like people aren't going to remember everything we do because we do so much and all the things, but you want to leave an impression, and for me, accountability and opportunity is that impression that, oh yeah, they're out there, they're doing these things, and they may not be able to recite, what a PSI is, which is a pre-sentence investigation report, right? But they know that we're in these different spaces, but really it's about leaving a positive impression that probation, number one, is vital, and that we care, and that we're doing a good job.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's a constant education process, right? Just across the board. So
no, it is, and usually probably with a lot of across counties, one of the traditional things the chief does is you get invited to always go address the new grand jury, and about what probation does. And that was again, I recently did that. It was just the great appreciation was, one, we appreciate what you do. We can't believe how much you do.
Right.
Like we didn't know
surprised.
you did. They're surprised that how much you actually do. And
right.
So it's I think if the public understands how much we do and they appreciate what we do, then for me that's important to make sure that messaging is going out.
Right. Right. I mean, I know one time we had on Probation Services Weeks, someone had written kind of like the top 10 things about probation or why you should, appreciate, probation. And like one of the last comments was that they're there. Because really, what would our system look like? Because we do touch so many different things. It's not only unique, it's vital. I think that is something you just said. So, but not the public doesn't always know because hopefully they've never had to come into contact, right? But every time there's an opportunity to make a positive impact, that's obviously a way to change the understanding of how vital and unique the role could be. So,
yeah.
Well, is there anything that about this topic that we really haven't touched on yet? I mean, you guys had a long drive up here, so I'm sure you thought of a lot of different things that we want to hit on. So something that we didn't uncover that you want to share?
I'll just mention just another quote. I like quotes. So,
I love it.
I think this was Theodore Roosevelt, but I could be wrong. But
okay.
But it's like no one cares how much you know until they know how much you care. And I think that's what I've seen, and that's what I want our probation officers when we're dealing with a client or a victim or a coworker, that you might have the right answers, but it's going to fall on deaf ears unless you build that rapport and you show that you care. And I think that's something that probation is really good at. And officers who are successful are able to do that because you listen to people you trust. If you don't trust somebody and you haven't built that rapport, you could be saying the exact right things, but they're not going to listen. And so I think that's something that probation does really well, and something that we should take pride in because that's where real difference makes is when you build that trust.
That's a great point. Can you top that, Chief Reyes? That was pretty good.
If I could recite the Man in the Arena by Theodore Roosevelt's speech, I won't be able to do that. But I will say, I guess, is really, when I started with that, when I try to describe probation, we're always serving. And I really think that we as a profession have to continue to be willing to serve for whatever the state or our counties ask of us. And I think if we are committed to that, we will remain a vital piece of the criminal justice system. And I think that takes a great deal of leadership and commitment on our part, and making sure our officers have the resources to effectively deal with crime out on the streets, which I think is important that we're in that space doing our part, while at the same time providing those opportunities to the people we have coming through our doors every single day in hopes that we can move them to be willing to change, and then being able to take advantage of those services, and hopefully with our support, they'll exit the system and have a productive life. Ultimately, if we could do both in an effective way, we've contributed to public safety. So that's kind of my ideal hope as we move forward.
Yeah. Well, it seems like you guys have been doing a fabulous job, not only in your departments, but sitting at our table and trying to help just statewide, as thinking through these really, really tough issues. I have to say, I cannot get out of my mind the picture. So this is what I am leaving this podcast with is I need a new Bitmoji, me holding on to the pendulum swinging, just kind of like a little like going back and forth. Your description of that is perfect. It does feel like probation's constantly trying to hold the, kind of going from one extreme to the other. And sometimes it's politically, trying to make sure that you're having the right types of conversations and building those coalitions and the collaborations necessary to hold that, and to implement those, those reforms that we're asking our folks to do. So it's a tough job, but it sounds like a rewarding job, and it sounds like we've got the right people in the job. So that's really exciting to hear, and hopefully folks take that from this this podcast. We're going to be asking people, I want to ask, especially since this is, the chiefs are really the ones who we've had on the podcast and will in the future. So as we're looking at, what your staff is doing, the modern probation officer, et cetera, if you weren't chief, what job assignment in your department would you be most interested in doing?
Well, I've liked everything I did, and that's a great thing about probation is there's literally like 10 different things you can do, right? True. So it's really exciting. But for me, probably when I was a supervisor, that was kind of the most exciting because you're kind of right in the middle where you're still very close to the work that's being done by staff, but your scope of influence has increased a little bit. So that was always for me kind of the most kind of dynamic, and you really, you're impacting change, but you see it right in front of you. Whereas chief, sometimes you're obviously impacting change and giving vision, but you're a little bit more removed from the actual work that got you into why you liked probation in the first place.
Sure.
So that to me is that supervisor spot is kind of right in the middle there. I talk about balance again.
Yeah.
And so maybe I'm just drawn to balance in general.
It seems like a theme.
Yeah, but that's to me it's a great spot to be, and it's to me it's all about when you make impact on people's life, whether it's the clients or a victim or your coworkers.
Right.
That's what probation is so special. And you have so many opportunities to positively impact people in the field of probation, and that's why it's a wonderful career.
Yeah, you're changing and influencing not only the clients, but changing and influencing the people who are going to have the influence on even more clients as they go out. That's great. So, what about you, Chief Reyes?
I don't know. I was going to turn the question around and ask you to guess what you think I would do.
I don't know. That's
no, I won't have you do that. No, if I wasn't the chief, I would just leave me alone in training.
That would have been my guess.
Yeah, I've had a chance to be our training coordinator way back when as a supervisor, and I always appreciate the opportunity to really be impactful to staff.
Yeah. Whether
it's direct teaching or just coaching or just researching what are the best practices out there and how can we adopt them, in our department to make sure that they were all prepared to go out there and do their jobs every day, which was I appreciated about that assignment. So,
yeah, no, that's great.
Yeah.
Well, all I can say is clearly Kern, San Luis Obispo, they're in good hands. And so it was really great to have you both with us today. And we hope you come back. So thank you for joining us.
Anytime.
Thank you.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it.
Appreciate it.